All right, people are getting in. Welcome everybody to our Inflation Reduction Act webinar. We'll let more people come in. If you're already in the room, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. You can put your name, your organization, and your location in the chat. We'd love to hear where you are listening from. Welcome again. We'll just give it maybe one more minute, 30 seconds for more people to come in. But again, if you're already in the webinar, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to hear where you are listening and watching from. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. People will be trickling in, I'm sure. So welcome to our webinar, Inflation Reduction Act and How Affordable Housing Providers and Community-Based Organizations Can Prepare. We are really excited that you're here with us, and I'm personally really excited to have our speakers with us and to be talking about this really important subject. So Andrea just put it in the chat. If you just saw it, please feel free to introduce yourself. Let us know your name, your organization, and where you are located. So I'm Amanda Wilson. I'm a senior program officer at LISC, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. And before we move on, I do just want to note the picture that's on this first slide. So this is a picture from Westside Housing Organization and Green Ability Magazine. If you're from Kansas City, you probably know Westside Housing Organization. If they're on the call, shout out to them. So this is a picture of their Jefferson Place apartments. Westside Housing owns these 4 apartment buildings that house 15 units at Jefferson Place Apartments. The buildings are more than 100 years old and have previously been renovated and retrofitted with energy efficiency features. And then with a grant from Institute for Sustainable Communities, SunSmart Technologies installed 23 solar panels to generate over 22,000 kilowatts of kilowatt hours per year. And with that solar power, they're able to provide electricity for common area lightings like in hallways, porches, laundry room, and parking lot. So for Westside Housing, they and many others on the call, I'm sure, they really view that by keeping their operating costs low with energy efficiency and alternative sources of energy, that they're able to keep their rent prices low for their tenants. So I stole the picture, so giving them a shout out. But I think this is a great representation of just some of the opportunities that are available with the Inflation Reduction Act. So we will move on. Welcome everybody. And I'm really excited to be joined by some of our great speakers today. So first we'll hear from Mark Kudlowitz, based in DC. Mark is a senior policy director with LISC and advocates for federal policies that support LISC's national priorities, including affordable housing, rural development, community development, financial institutions, and sustainable development. We'll then next hear from Quinn Biever, who is based in Chicago and with Elevate. Quinn conducts research on industry conditions and assists with the development of policy positions and advocacy materials while also tracking state and federal legislation and regulatory proceedings. He leads the Affordable Housing /QAP work group for the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition and supports the Missouri Energy Efficiency for All Coalition. And then our third speaker we'll hear from is Leslie Zarker, based in DC. Leslie is a National Housing Trust Director of Sustainability Policy. Leslie works to advance clean energy policies and supports Energy Efficiency for All's Midwest state coalitions, and including the Missouri Energy Efficiency for All Coalition. And then we're also joined by Andrea Genero, LISC Greater Kansas City's Housing and Capacity Building Program Officer, who will be monitoring the chat in the Q&A. So, welcome. We wanted to put on this webinar because at least locally, we weren't hearing a lot about the Inflation Reduction Act yet, and especially what it means for community-based organizations and affordable housing developers who will have access to this money. So we wanted to be able to really set our partners up and our especially our nonprofit and our affordable housing developers partners up for accessing these funds and how they can best prepare for this money. There's still a lot of rules and regulations and information to come out from this act, but there still are things that our organizations can be doing now or soon. And then also, if we want to be able to influence that process of how these dollars are being allocated and how they're going out the door locally, then we want to give our partners that kind of information of how we can influence the process. So our speakers will be talking about some of these different things that you see on the slide here. So Mark will be talking about the overall context and background of the Inflation Reduction Act. Quinn will be talking about both the rebate programs and the tax credit programs. Leslie will be talking about the Green and Resilient retrofit program, and as well as the environmental and climate justice block grants. And then Mark will come back on to talk about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And then we're estimating about the last 15 minutes being Q&A. So again, thanks for joining. And if you haven't yet introduced yourself, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your organization, and your location. And then, so as I mentioned, just as far as like why we're doing this webinar, we're really targeting this webinar and this information specifically to affordable housing developers and providers, community-based organizations, community development corporations or CDCs, and other community development financial institutions. So if you have any questions for our speakers, use the Q&A function, and then Andrea will be monitoring that. And then also if our speakers are able to, they'll also be answering those questions in the Q&A. And then after the presentation is done, I'll be sending out a link to everybody registered with the recording and with the slide deck. And then I'll also use this email list to just share any updates that we hear, you know, as they are coming out. So, and if you want to opt out to those emails, totally fine. But just want to kind of use this group to communicate with after the session. And so, like I said, my name is Amanda Wilson. I'm a senior program officer with Greater Kansas City LISC. And LISC's mission is, together with residents and partners, LISC forges resilient and inclusive communities of opportunity across America, great places to live, work, visit, do business, and raise families. And then, so we are an intermediary. This just kind of shows what that looks like. We pool public and private dollars, partner with organizations doing the work on the ground, and invest in their projects and programs and their own internal capacity building by means of grants, loans, and technical assistance. So we've made investments in every state, as this map shows. And then we have a presence in much of rural US and in 38 local offices across the country, of which Kansas City is one of those. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Kudlowitz to give some just general context and background on the Inflation Reduction Act.
Thanks a lot, Amanda. It's really great to be here, and thanks for the invitation. Again, I'm Mark Kudlowitz. I'm on the LISC policy team, which, as Amanda pointed out, primarily focuses on federal policy. And I go to bat for our affordable housing, our CDFI, and our climate work. And so I'm thrilled to be able to talk today with my partners on this call about the Inflation Reduction Act. Can you go to the next slide, please, Amanda? So folks know we'll keep this kind of intro part short because we really want to save the majority of the time for each of the provisions that are the most applicable to affordable housing and community development practitioners. And like Amanda said, we try to really frame this with mission-based organizations in mind. We know that this can be confusing. There's been a series of, or a couple of different supplemental appropriations bills, additional spending by the federal government outside of the annual appropriation cycle since the beginning of this administration. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about what is the IRA, what's in it, and then each of the my partners and presenters on this can go into a little more detail. So at the end of last summer, the president signed into law this bill, this Inflation Reduction Act, which was a $369 billion worth of incentives, primarily around climate, although there's some other provisions in there around healthcare and others that are not really pertinent to our field. This kind of was a slimmed down version from the previous year work around the Build Back Better Act, which got stalled in the Senate. So these resources are the ones that we're going to talk to about are really quite needed, obviously, as the impacts of climate change continue, and really essential to meeting the administration's goal of cutting greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030. You got a little flavor of this in the intro from Amanda, but the programs are really structured in different forms of financial assistance from the government. We've got rebates that we're going to talk to and hear about for housing. There are grants. And there are also tax credits. And we think that the new law, especially with the administration's focus on environmental justice and ensuring that a certain percentage of federal financial assistance is going to underserved communities, really does provide a big opportunity for community-based organizations who are doing climate justice work broadly. And one thing before going to the next slide, I think one of the great things about IRA, and there's a lot of things to like here, is that in some ways I'm hopeful that it also kind of formalizes a partnership that's existed in practice between environmental organizations and housing and community development organizations, but more concretely with federal subsidy. Next slide, please. So it's just kind of alluding to this, and you'll hear about this through each of the presenters' talks about the programs they're covering. But Congress did a really interesting job here where a lot of the specific IRA programs have bonuses built in, either for rebates or credits, or targeting with grant programs for underserved communities, or explicitly for affordable housing. So a really tremendous opportunity. Again, the administration itself, outside of those congressional directives built into the law, the administration has really been laser focused on furthering environmental justice through what they call their Justice 40 initiative. And if you want more information about that, you can Google it. And they've got a mapping website that shows that what are environmental justice communities and which programs are currently targeting with this 40% set aside of resources to those places. So as we talk through these different provisions, I thought it was really important to kind of in some ways characterize this about what is a direct funding opportunity as someone who used to work for a community-based organization. Like, can I actually be a direct recipient of funding here? And what's an indirect? And by indirect, I mean really trying to work with a direct recipient that may have resources that you can apply for through that entity, or by utilizing the subsidies that may be coming down administratively in different forms, right? Could be through your state energy office for rebates. It could be other third parties that have the dollars that then go into a project. As we'll hear throughout the presentation, the majority of these IRA opportunities for community-based groups are going to be indirect. Next slide. Great. I think this last one, I'll turn it back over. So on the direct, the way I was thinking about this when we were putting this presentation together is that, as you'll hear, the HUD Green and Resilient Retrofit Program, which is really for owners, and Leslie will get into this, of privately assisted HUD housing that has project-based rental assistance contracts. That's a real direct funding opportunity from the department for resilience activities and retrofits. The environmental and climate justice block grants, which we'll hear about, which is a $3 billion program. There are potentials for directly accessing those resources, and there's also a potential for getting them through intermediaries that the EPA wants to fund under this competition. On the indirect side, we see a lot more. So the same ones that could be direct can also sometimes be indirect, depending on how the federal agencies structure these. As Amanda stated, a lot of these still need guidance and rules, and LISC and Elevate and NHT. All the folks on this call with our partners in the mission-based space have really been doing a lot of work during since really probably the fall of last year, submitting comments to the different federal agencies as they implement this. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is primarily going to be an indirect opportunity. The tax credits at the IRS, the ITC, and the energy efficient home credit, and then as well the Department of Energy's homes and high efficiency electric home rebate programs are going to primarily flow through your state energy offices. Next slide, please. Okay, great. And I'll turn it over to Quinn.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, let me see if I can, I'll check to see if I can advance the slides here in a second. But hello, everyone. My name is Quinn Biever. I'm a policy analyst at Elevate. Elevate is a nonprofit implementer. We primarily focus on energy efficiency, electrification, renewable energy, and healthy housing measures. So it's really great to be here with you all. Just moving forward here, this is some of the content that I'm going to cover. As Amanda and Mark pointed out, a lot of what we tried to aim for with this presentation is to take all of the many things that are in the IRA and distill them down into what is relevant for affordable housing owners and folks in the affordable housing industry, including community-based organizations. And so I'm going to cover the rebates through the homes, the rebates through the Department of Energy, the homes and HERA rebates, a couple of other programs, including the contractor training grants and low emissions electricity program, and then the tax credits. And the tax credits and resources, the only thing I'll say about that is I'm a policy analyst. I'm not a tax professional. So my goal with presenting these is to give you an idea of what they are, what's included, some of the changes, because a lot of the tax credit information is going to be related to either tax credits that were created or just expanded, and many times expanded or enhanced. And then one of the things that Amanda and I were shooting for with this was to try to provide some resources so that you can walk away from this presentation with some places that you can check and sort of keep tabs on things and help you organize all of this information even once the presentation's done. So let's see. Elevate, our website is elevatenp.org. So that's NP as in nonprofit, elevatenp.org. Okay, so let's get rolling. So the first rebate is the Home Energy Performance-Based Whole House Retrofit program. Most people refer to it as homes. It's a little bit easier to say. Between the two, I always tell people the way to remember this is that the first one, the homes rebate, is related to retrofits. So think homes, you're doing whole house sort of retrofits. Funded with $4.3 billion available until it's expended or until 2031, whichever comes first. With both of these, excuse me, with both of these rebates, they are formula funding and begin in 2 years, and I believe both end in 2031 or until expended. So these rebates are for retrofits, and they are based on the energy conservation that is created by the retrofit. So as you can see down there with the sub bullet points, it can include heat pumps and electrification. The amount is determined by modeled or actual savings, and the amount is also variable depending on the level of energy savings that's acquired. So it pertains to both single family and multifamily retrofits. Single family retrofits are treated as a 1 unit building essentially, and then multifamily, the funding is allocated by unit. And then as you can see there on the fourth sub bullet point, there's sort of different levels. So beginning at 15% energy savings up into 20% energy savings, it's the rebate is based on a per kilowatt hour basis. And then 20 to 35 is sort of the level 2, and then 35% energy savings and above is sort of the third level there. There is also a $200 incentive written into the bill for contractors who are serving in what they refer to as disadvantaged communities. Some people would take issue with that terminology, but yeah, that's the way it's written in the bill. And then there's an additional $200 million that's I'll talk about a little bit later for some of the workforce development that will go into basically bringing about the workforce and the contractors needed for some of this work. So next slide, please. Okay, and then the second rebate that is of note is the High Efficiency Electric Home Rebate Act, otherwise known as the HERA. So like I said, when I tell people about these two, the Homes Act is for retrofit, so think whole home, and then the HERA is for equipment. Funding is about the same. It's just under 4.3 billion to states, though the total amount is about 4.5 billion, right? It's actually exactly 4.5 billion, with 225 million to tribes. Once again, available until 2031 or until expended. Formula funding starts in 2 years. And so as you can see, these are the caps for the rebate for each piece of equipment or each measure. So I'm not going to read those out. You can see those there. They're sort of on a sliding scale depending on the expense of the equipment that's there. And then the other thing that I want to mention is that's of particular note for lower income communities or affordable housing folks is that 100% of the rebate is available for folks, building owners who are at less than 80% of the area median income. For multifamily buildings, that can refer to the majority of the tenants in that building. So if the majority of the tenants are at or below 80% of the area median income, 100% of those rebates is available. Half of the rebate is available for sort of the next tier where it's 80 to 150% of the area median income. And the thing that I kind of refer to with this for people is that I kind of call it the Menards type situation where sometimes people go to Menards, you buy a can of paint or something, and they give you your receipt, and it tells you there's a rebate on there so that you can mail in your receipt and get your like $1.15 back, and no one does it. This is not like that. So these refunds are at the point of sale. So they really, when they were sort of creating these rebates, they wanted to sort of get over the hurdle or the upfront barrier, the barrier of the upfront cost. Yeah, and in addition, as with the other rebate, there's a $500 incentive for contractors doing work in what they call disadvantaged communities, and also a $500 incentive for non-governmental organizations and governments conducting these retrofits. And remember, this is just for the equipment, and there's sort of explicit language in the bill about not double dipping here. So with these two federal programs, you can't get both a rebate for the equipment and have that equipment be part of a retrofit that you also get a rebate for. So with these two, it's kind of one or the other. So next slide, please. And here's just a timeline that I found was pretty helpful. Applications. So there was sort of the RFI process, the request for information, that ended in March, and with that, on March 23rd, applications for early administration funds opened. Those are just funds for state energy offices to apply for money to start to gear up both in terms of their internal infrastructure and also for hiring for the people power needed to run these programs. So those applications are open now and will continue to be open until the programmatic funding application opens, which will likely be this summer. And so DOE also mentioned, as you can see on the timeline, it's a little bit small there in red, but they're going to continue providing guidance through the spring and summer. And then spending plans are going to be due by the end of summer, and funding is expected to be made available at the beginning of next year. So really kind of a prescient time for this information, because it's going to get going. And so we want folks to be ready for it. Next slide, please. Okay, just a quick thing that I wanted to mention, since it was related to these two rebates, is that there is a state-based home energy efficiency contractor training grant provision in the bill for $200 million. Once again, like the two rebates, till expended or until 2031, through U.S. Department of Energy, through the state energy offices. And this is basically just money that can be applied for to help these state energy offices to ramp up, to make sure that they have the people power to implement these programs, and to get contractors and the associated workforce adequately strengthened so that these programs can run efficiently. Next slide, please. Something else I just wanted to mention that is captured in the bill that I don't think the two other speakers here are going to mention, but there's a low emissions electricity program funded with $87 million. Once again, until expended or until 2031. This is essentially money that's set aside for education, technical assistance, and partnerships with low income or what they call disadvantaged communities. Basically for areas that are burdened by domestic electricity generation. So I think of this just as like, if there's a power plant in a community that is burdened by that, this is money set aside to educate those communities and build sort of partnerships to facilitate relationships that would alleviate some of those burdens, especially as more things become electrified and we start to address some of the environmental justice issues that are currently at play, but should be eliminated as part of the clean energy transition. So just something to mention. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is just the update on that. Further guidance is expected, but there was an RFI, a request for information, that was open over the winter. Next slide, please. A few other provisions that are of interest that I'm not going to get into, but that you might want to look into if they are relevant to you. The Defense Production Act was invoked to make available $500 million for the production of heat pumps and solar parts domestically. And then there are tribal energy loans, rural renewable energy loans, and rural electric cooperative loans that are also made available through the IRA. Next slide, please. So these are the 5 tax credits that I'm going to talk about really quickly. The reason I say quickly is because I don't want to take up too much more time for some of the other important measures in the bill. But these are important tax credits. As I've got there kind of at the bottom left, tax credits make up 70% or 75% rather of the IRA's $400 billion that it accesses. So it's a pretty big chunk of the money that's available. And as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, these tax credits a lot of times are not new. A lot of times they're just expanded or enhanced from tax credits that were either had ended or were set to sunset, and that got renewed and reinvested in. So next slide, please. I want to get into these. And once again, I'm just going to mention I'm not a tax professional and I never will be. So please consult a tax professional when it comes to like sort of the granular details, but I'm going to give kind of the broad strokes so that you're aware of these and kind of know about them and what they're for. So the first one is the residential energy efficiency tax credit, known as 25C. Like a lot of the things that I've mentioned so far, it is extended through 2031 from this year. Covers existing homes and or for existing homes covering equipment purchase and installation. And then residential efficiency and electrification upgrades, such as the ones that are listed below, can receive a 30% tax credit. So one of the things that this, the extension of this tax credit does, well, it's extended, but it's also enhanced because the annual $500 limit was increased to $3,200. And then, as you can see below, there are caps for the tax credit that can be accessed for each of those provisions, which none of these are any small thing. And then labor can sometimes also be eligible for the tax credit. Next slide, please. And so kind of the sibling here is the residential clean energy tax credit. The other one was efficiency. This is the clean energy tax credit, 25D, for existing homes and new construction. This is essentially can be thought of as an investment tax credit for small residential renewable energy projects. So once again, this is like the clean energy version. The credit amount does depend with this one on when the project begins. So that 30% is available until 2032. And then it sort of depreciates after that in 2033 and 2034. And as you can see, this is kind of the solar hot water heaters, wind turbines, ground source heat pumps, battery storage, and sometimes labor are sort of the clean energy measures that are eligible for 25D. Next slide, please. So there are a number of resources that I'm going to mention here, especially towards the end, but also sort of sprinkled in throughout. But one of the resources that I want folks to know about is this chart by Energy Solutions. Just does a really great job of distilling a lot of information into one chart. So Energy Solutions, hats off to you guys because, you know, you can see right there, 25C, 25D, back to back, you know, what they cover in terms of the measure, the threshold that needs to be met, the coverage, the financial coverage that it that's there, and then, you know, depending on what sort of building it is eligible, is kind of all laid out in one clean chart. So that's a great one that'll be made available afterwards. Next slide, please. Yeah, so two other kind of sibling tax credits I'm going to mention are the first is the energy efficiency commercial buildings tax credit, so 179D. This is an older tax credit from 2005 that was made permanent a few years ago and then enhanced by the IRA. It modifies formula funding that was used to calculate the energy efficiency deductions for buildings 4 or more stories. Previously only new construction buildings, but now existing buildings as well. There's a lot of questions as to how that's going to work, but basically there's ongoing guidance that's being released as to how that's going to be applied. But the credit essentially will go towards the 3 main categories of efficiency measures. So lighting, building envelope, which includes air sealing and insulation, and then building systems, otherwise known as HVAC. And so the one downside about 179D is that LIHTC eligible basis is reduced by this. So 45L and ITC, which I'm about to talk about, are not this way. They're compatible with LIHTC, but this one is not. But on the better news side, it increases the tax credit deduction from $1.88 per square foot to $2.50 a square foot, and potentially up to $5 depending on the labor and prevailing wage standards that are employed. So there's also more information on the IRS and DOE websites if you're interested. And there's a couple of resources that I think I'm going to mention later on. Next slide. There we go. So new energy efficient home tax credit, otherwise known as 45L. This is also extended and enhanced for the next 10 years and was actually retroactively extended for projects from last year. Like I said, it doesn't reduce the LIHTC basis, and this is actually something that I found was an update from the way that 45L used to be until now. Is it used to be for only buildings with 3 or fewer stories, and now includes all single family and multifamily buildings. So not just 3 or fewer stories. So that parenthetical is actually out of date on my slide. Yeah, all 3 single family and multifamily building, or all single family and multifamily buildings. And so there are a number of improvements that are made in addition to the extension. Like I said, it's enhanced. So it improves the energy standards. Previously, 45L was a credit that was tied to the percent of energy conservation. It's now based on these 2 energy standards that you can see in the chart down there, Energy Star new construction and the Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready Homes. So that's sort of a really great enhancement, because as building certifications continue to get stronger and we're able to meet them more easily, this credit is going to be more easily accessed. So rather than, the energy conservation, which would always sort of be the same sort of percentage, this will get better and better as time goes on. This is applied to new construction or major renovation. So the new energy efficient home credit, it's not really a new tax credit, and it's also not just for new construction. So you can just think of the new as new and improved. And then based on whether or not, and this is sort of true for a number of things throughout these provisions, but whether or not prevailing wage is being met and sort of the labor standards that are used for the project has a big effect on the tax credit that is made eligible. So as you can see down there, by a factor of 5, whether or not prevailing wage was used really multiplies or divides the tax credit that's available. And obviously, depending on the strength of the energy standard that's used, also determines how much of the tax credit is available. So, and like the other tax credit, more info is available on the Department of Energy and the EPA's website. Next slide. There we go. So the last tax credit that I'm going to talk about, and I'm trying to make this quick, but there's a lot of information, so forgive me. But so the bonus affordable housing solar tax credit, ITC, is investment tax credit. Production tax credit, PTC, is sort of the other side of the coin there. So the ITC refers to the reduction of federal income tax liability for a percentage of the actual system, and then the PTC is for a tax credit per kilowatt hour generated. So generally you can't claim both, but my understanding is that you can claim each for co-located systems. So a production tax credit for, say, the production generated by the solar panels, and then an investment tax credit for, say, the storage equipment. Installation and indirect costs are sometimes included, or I think are included explicitly. And then The equipment has to be either slightly previous, I think they say limitedly previously used or new. And then certain tax credits can be claimed as a direct payment for tax exempt entities. So if you're part of a nonprofit or an organization that is tax exempt, you can claim a direct payment, which is really nice. And like a lot of these credits, the amounts begin to phase out in 2033. Next slide, please. Here's another resource from DOE, Energy Solutions chart. I think this is one just does a really good job of putting the two tax credits back to back, and you can sort of follow it along depending on whether you're looking at ITC or PTC or both, and the base rate or the full rate, and then when the construction starts. Like I said, that has an effect on, or actually, I think that's my next slide, is that has an effect on the amount of tax credits available. So next slide, please. And yeah, here we go. Just a few more facts. The beginning of the construction is a variable in the amount of tax credit that is available. And begins to, let's see, no longer, part of the enhancement here is that it no longer reduces LIHTC eligible bases, so it's compatible with low-income housing tax credits. And yeah, retroactively captures projects from last year through 2032, so for that 10-year period. Next slide. And then this is just capturing the timeline from that same sort of timeline screen grab that I've got. As you can see, this is like the most simple timeline because the RFI was, in November of last year, guidance was released in February, and the next thing that it lists is tax credits expire in January of 2032. So pretty simple there. Next slide, please. And then finally, this is the last thing that I'm going to say about it. So Novogradac has a mapping tool for the stackability because there are bonuses that are available for low income and affordable housing. I would be remiss to not mention those on this webinar. So it depends on what qualifications are met. So multifamily financed by LIHTC or other federal funding is eligible for a 20% bonus. There are 10% bonuses that are for eligible census tracts, Indian areas defined by the Internal Revenue Code for new markets. And so that Novogradac mapping tool does a really good job of figuring out sort of how the stacking and the geography comes into play. So I've got the link there at the bottom if you want to check that out. So I know there's a lot of questions. As I mentioned before, the rebates can't stack because those are the federal funding programs, but a lot of times the tax credits can. So figuring out how to do that is a complex equation that I'm not going to dabble in, but I want to provide you resources if you'd like. Next slide, please. And I think all I've got left. So here are some tax credit guidance, and for the sake of time, I'm not going to list too many of these, but I think the bottom line on each of these is just that direct payment election is sometimes available. So if you're a tax exempt entity, you can sometimes claim a direct payment. If you're wondering, like, how would we do that if we don't have tax, if we don't pay taxes for a tax exempt entity? Federal labor standards a lot of times affect the amount of tax credits. Like I said, there are bonus credit percentages that folks can qualify for certain areas, low income areas, and affordable housing projects. Recapture is just related to staying in compliance, and then financing reduction is just related to how the project is financed. So I'm going to move forward. And I think all I have left is just some of the resources that I want to let folks be aware of. So one is Rewiring America has an IRA savings calculator. So this is really helpful, mostly related to, I think, consumers, but I wanted to throw this out there just because Rewiring America is another organization that has just put a lot of really great policy information together. So check out the calculator, and while you're there, you can click around because Rewiring America is just doing a lot of really good work trying to distill some of the complicated information that's related to the Inflation Reduction Act. Next slide. Just another resource, the Homeowner's Guide to the Federal Tax Credit for Solar Photovoltaics. Just a really good guide that's got information for tax credits for solar. Next slide. I think Leslie's going to mention this, but National Housing Trust has got a boot camp for both housing finance agencies or multifamily affordable housing providers. So those two tracks are available there. Next slide. I think this is my last one. And then this is just a tax credit fact sheet and also a frequently asked questions document, both of which I found super helpful just because anytime you're looking at stuff on the IRS, it can be sort of mind-boggling. And, you know, so a fact sheet that's really simple to read and then an FAQ I found really helpful. So I wanted to put this out there as well with the link. Okay, that was a lot of information. I really apologize if I lost you at any point, but I wanted to give you as much as I could in a time that was also respectful of my other speakers. My name's Quinn Biever. There's my information. Thank you so much. And we're going to take questions at the end because I'm sure there are a ton of them. Oh, and here's Leslie Zarker from the National Housing Trust.
Thank you so much, Quinn. And hi, everybody. I'm Leslie Zarker. I'm Director of Sustainability Policy at National Housing Trust. And just a word about the National Housing Trust. We create and preserve affordable homes. We have just over 4,000 multifamily apartments across 13 states. And we're a bit unusual in that we combine resident services, sustainable development, lending, and also policy advocacy all under one roof. Let me go to my next slide. I don't know if Amanda can hear me. Can you guys hear me? Okay, next slide after that, actually. Thanks. So about HUD's Green and Resilient Retrofit Program. So first of all, this is the only program targeting affordable housing specifically. And then specifically HUD-assisted project-based rental housing. It doesn't apply to public housing or to unsubsidized affordable housing. This is a competitive grant application. The funds flow directly from HUD to the end user, unlike a lot of the other programs that Quinn mentioned, going through the state energy offices or other intermediaries. This one is direct to the recipient. So this is $1 billion in appropriations through September 30th, 2028 for the eligible uses you see here: energy and water efficiency projects, indoor air quality, so healthy housing projects, low carbon emissions, things like electrification projects, solar projects, climate resilience projects to make your properties resilient to weather events, and of course, energy and water benchmarking, which I'm going to get into more in a second. This is actually not a full $1 billion. It's $837.5 million because HUD is using $60 million to administer the program, another $60 million to administer subcontracts related to running the program, and then there is $42.5 million to benchmark energy to help all of us in affordable housing benchmark our energy and water use for eligible properties. Next slide. Yeah, right. And so how can we prepare for the IRA? The first step for affordable housing providers is definitely knowing your energy and carbon performance of your buildings. to really position yourself to be in the best, to demonstrate the energy savings potential of the buildings you're targeting for these competitive grants, and to demonstrate the carbon emissions reduction potential and, for example, the solar potential of your buildings. So the first thing you would want to do is to benchmark, if you're not already doing so, benchmarking your building's energy consumption, both the owner paid and the tenant paid data. So more and more utilities are providing aggregated tenant data. You can reach out to your utilities to do that. And if you've never done benchmarking before, I recommend HUD's multifamily utility benchmarking toolkit, which is linked there. The next thing you definitely want to be doing is modeling the energy savings potential for your properties. Quinn mentioned the DOE homes rebates. That program requires an energy model to qualify for the rebates, and I expect other IRA programs will be as well. So you won't need a full OSHRA audit for this, as I understand. I think you can have a BPI analyst or a resident rater run a model based on a sample of the units in your property using approved energy audit software. You also want to calculate your building's greenhouse gas emissions baseline as much as possible. And there's an excellent spreadsheet to do that specifically for multifamily buildings. Stewards for Affordable Housing for the Future, or SAFE, has created this multifamily portfolio carbon emissions calculator. It's linked there. And this takes your energy data. You can import your data from Energy Star Portfolio Manager, or if you don't have complete data for your property, it can use estimates based on properties with similar characteristics in your climate zone. And then finally, you want to estimate the carbon reduction potential of your portfolio. And SAFE has what's called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Roadmap. Right now, they're piloting this tool. But this is going to be a great tool to help you reduce your portfolio's carbon emissions. Say you want to hit a certain target, you have a target of 50% reduction in carbon emissions by a certain date. This can help you figure out how to get from your baseline emissions to your target emissions goal using different strategies, like deploying solar or replacing natural gas furnaces with heat pumps. There's lots of stuff baked into the algorithm of this spreadsheet that helps you figure this stuff out. Next slide, please. All right, so how else can we prepare for the IRA? Definitely, we should be advocating hard in our states and locally, specifically for affordable housing. And this slide really is related to advocacy for the DOE rebate programs that Quinn covered. What can we be doing to reach out to our state energy offices who really have a lot of flexibility on how to design these programs? So we want to make sure that the rebates are easy to access and that they're equitable in their access. Which means in Missouri, for example, the Division of Energy is the department that will be rolling out these rebates, and they need to hear from us. So if you haven't already, I recommend joining your local advocacy groups to amplify your message. In Missouri, that would be Missouri's Energy Efficiency Advisory Collaborative's Low-Income Working Group. Contact Dana Gray from Tower Grove CDC, and her email is right there on the slide. The other thing to be urging the Division of Energy to do is to take advantage of DOE's administrative support funds to plan out this program. DOE issued guidance last month that states states can use up to 2.5% of their allotment, their formula allotment for these rebates for planning. So things like community outreach and engagement on how to design their program, coordination with utilities, and internal capacity building, which a lot of state energy offices need. So they should be reaching out to DOE to use these funds. And I wanted to cover a few of the core equity points to consider when advocating for program design. The first is really to advocate for creating a 20% set aside for low-income multifamily buildings to access this program. We know that affordable multifamily housing providers face many barriers to implementing major energy efficiency retrofits. And when whole building projects do get done, it can take up to like 24 months to set up the financing and the pre-development work. And without a set aside specifically for multifamily, I am concerned that IRA rebates could get used up by single family households who can access the funds more quickly. A second thing to advocate for is providing one-stop shop technical assistance to affordable housing providers. Again, multifamily housing providers. The problem here is that affordable housing staff, as we all know, are already stretched too thin, just operating and maintaining our properties. And so states can and do provide, a lot of states provide TA to help multifamily providers do things like identify additional funding, help with a full energy audit, developing scopes of work, and so forth, that really make the difference in reducing those barriers. The next point is to streamline income eligibility requirements. And as we know, one of the biggest barriers that multifamily providers face when trying to access these programs is verifying low income eligibility of the residents in their buildings. It just can be a huge burden to collect documentation from every family. So states should accept income verification proof from other public assistance programs where whole categories of buildings become automatically eligible, like those financed using LIHTC tax credits or buildings on HUD's means tested program lists. The next point is asking states to provide upfront pre-development funds for these retrofit projects, because we know affordable housing, we have very thin operating budgets. We often don't have the funds for things like design and development or electrification or solar feasibility studies. So this can make the difference with these kinds of projects. And then finally, definitely requiring affordability. If properties are receiving public funds for these upgrades, we want to make sure the buildings remain affordable for the residents and that rents aren't raised. Next slide, please. And so Amanda asked me to talk about EPA's environmental and climate justice block grants. So the goal here is to carry out energy and environmental projects that benefit historically underserved communities, especially communities of color and indigenous tribes. There's $3 billion in funding, $2.8 billion of that is for financial assistance, and $200 million is for technical assistance. These are 3-year awards that should be awarded by September 2026. And the eligible entities are community-based organizations or a partnership between a CBO and local government or Indian tribe or institution of higher education, or a partnership of a coalition of CBOs locally. And so here are some of the eligible uses you can see for the $2.8 billion. There is stuff like outdoor air pollution, but there's a lot here that can be used for affordable housing retrofit work. The low carbon emissions technologies, which can and should include energy efficiency upgrades. This can be used. Funding for climate resiliency measures, extreme heat measures. So for example, that could cover installing heat pumps for the purposes of air conditioning, where maybe there hasn't been a need for air conditioning in a property before, but now there is. There's funds for indoor air pollution, so it can address all kinds of healthy housing measures. So there's a lot there that we can take advantage of, and I urge you to look at this on EPA's website. And a word about the technical assistance. EPA does understand that this type of competitive application process is very time and resource intensive for smaller CBOs. And just administering these large grants and completing reporting requirements can be real barriers for smaller CBOs. And so they're providing this TA to assist the smaller CBOs and really strongly encourage them to apply and to get this technical assistance and then the financing. So next slide. So what is a CBO? Obviously, we all know it when we see it, but for the purposes of these grants, they do have a specific definition. So it's a public or private nonprofit organization. It supports the community through engagement, education, or related services. And this definitely includes nonprofit affordable housing. And a community can be a geographic area, or it can be a community of people defined by across a larger geographic region or even the nation that have a particular need. For example, affordable housing residents, displaced workers, children with asthma is a community that can be addressed in these applications. What is not a CBO is a college or university, hospitals, or for-profit companies, although we can definitely partner with them and are encouraged to do so by EPA for their technical expertise, for example. Next slide. What is a disadvantaged community? We all definitely know what this is. We know them, the neighborhoods in our areas. We work in them, we live in them. We partner with residents and CBOs, but for the purpose of these grant applications, we need to demonstrate that the communities we're serving are disadvantaged. So how do we do that? These are two key tools that EPA has developed to do that. The Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool identifies communities with particular burdens, excessive pollution, climate change, energy, health burdens. And you can go in there and get all kinds of data on these burdens to use in your grant applications. The environmental EJ Screen, it's a mapping and screening tool in environmental justice. It combines both environmental and socioeconomic data on any census tract community across the United States. So you can get a lot of data there as well. Next slide. Yeah, the boot camps. I definitely wanted to mention the boot camps. We just launched yesterday these IRA boot camps for multifamily affordable housing providers. There's also one for housing finance agencies. So the goal here is to help affordable housing providers take advantage of the IRA funds. We'll be doing a deep dive into all of these programs. This will be 10 to 12 workshops offered virtually over an 8-month program. We'll be covering electrification, possible projects, climate resilience, renewable energy. We'll also be going into HUD's new benchmarking program, and we'll be providing individual portfolio screening. So an assessment of your housing portfolio's potential for energy efficiency and electrification upgrades, as well as solar and climate resilience upgrades. We'll be looking at your state and local policies to support this work, as well as the IRA funding. We'll be looking at a financial analysis of your options there and providing implementation recommendations for projects. So if you'd like to learn more, there's a QR code you can scan. Please apply by May 12th, or just go to nationalhousingtrust.org IRA/bootcamps. I think that is my last slide. Next slide. Right. Oh, I should have mentioned that those boot camps are free due to the support of Wells Fargo's foundation. So they are free to all affordable housing providers and to the HFAs. Thank you so much. And if you'd like to get more information, that's my contact information.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. I'm going to briefly in the next 5 minutes go through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund so we can save at least 5 minutes for questions. Next slide, please. So the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is the largest line item in the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a $27 billion program at the EPA. And just to put that in perspective, the EPA's annual budget is usually around $9 billion. So this one program is 3 times the agency's entire appropriation. And that's really important to note because this is a delegated program. The EPA has divided this $27 billion into 3 competitions. They recently released a program implementation framework to tell the public generally what it looks like and to provide comments with the goal of getting a funding notice out in June of this year. The first one is in what they're calling a National Clean Investment Fund, and it's going to fund 2 to 3 national nonprofits that can partner with other private capital providers. So think community lenders, CDFIs, green banks, other mission-oriented lenders to deliver financing at scale. The other component to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that they announced is the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. And this is $6 billion. Think of this program almost entirely as a program as pass-through grants to community lenders. So how it would work is they will fund 2 to 7 what they're calling hub nonprofits, again, most likely national nonprofit lenders of different institution types that have a plan to support what they call community lenders, which could be CDFIs, credit unions, green banks, HFAs, minority depository institution banks, or others that will use that money for what they call eligible projects. Next slide. The third one is the Solar for All, which is going to be more focused on states and jurisdictions and tribal governments. Nonprofits are eligible, but because that's one of the smaller buckets of funding, I'm going to focus more on the previous 2, which are more nonprofit centric for the purposes of this audience. But for the Solar for All program, we'll also have a low-income and disadvantaged set aside, and it's designed to support residential and community solar. Next slide. Okay, this is the objectives. Of course, the program with a name like this, you got to reduce greenhouse gases. Now, the devil's a little bit in the details till we see the funding notice on what that means in practice. If it has to be a full reduction and no fossil fuels, or if they'll allow a certain amount. It appears they may allow just a reduction. It doesn't have to the project will have to be completely free of fossil fuel emissions. They really want to see benefits being passed on to disadvantaged communities through the President's Justice 40 initiative and see leverage of this public resources for private capital. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to do this really quickly. This bucket of funding, again, only 2 to 3 awardees. There's not really a pass-through opportunity here to other community lenders, except for the lenders that go in with the lead applicant to administer this money. That's what differentiates this bucket of funding, which is for direct investments, is how they term it at the EPA. So kind of direct project financing versus the Clean Communities program, which again is really focused on essentially creating thousands of subrecipient relationships. So this entity is going to be a direct financing provider. It could purchase loan or provide a variety of different credit types to support these eligible projects, these greenhouse gas reduction projects nationally. Next slide. If you're a community lender, and that's the key here, unfortunately, as of now, they don't allow community development corporations or other non-financial institution lender types to participate. You may be able to receive up to $5 million in capitalization funding for activities related to eligible projects under this program. So 1 or more entities will apply, 1 or more will get awarded, up to 7, and then 95% of the amount of that award for that direct recipient under this program is going to be passed through to community lenders, so CDFIs and green banks and HFAs and others. They can also receive an associated technical assistance subaward, the community lender that the money is passed through to build their capacity to achieve what they said they're going to achieve with these eligible projects in this community in their community. So you can see this is very focused on financing entities, mission-based financing entities, and building their capacity to go ahead and finance eligible projects. Next slide. What are the types of projects? Let's just really quickly talk about that because we've already talked about the Justice 40 initiative. There's really kind of there's a qualified projects and there's priority projects. There's a few that are kind of talked about in the implementation framework: distributed power generation and storage, decarbonization efforts, retrofits of existing buildings, so squarely with kind of nonprofit housing organizations, and transportation pollution reduction. That's in the priority project bucket. Next slide. This is the definition, I'm not going to go through it, of qualified projects. Essentially, as what we know now from the EPA, again, without having a funding notice till June, is that you can also propose qualified projects in your application to them for funding, as long as they meet these 5 criteria. So this could potentially have a lot of housing impact. So if you look at it, like the second one, say you were doing retrofits for single family, or you're doing recapitalization activities for a multifamily property, well, that would hit the housing bucket, that would hit the climate bucket, potentially the energy one. You would certainly leverage funds, you would use commercially available materials, and you would invest the funds in the proposed project, which would, again, have leverage with other sources. So there's a lot of potential here. This is still relatively undefined. We'll have to see in the funding notice if the EPA creates safe harbor definitions and explicitly define certain qualified projects, or if they're just going to leave it open-ended and make the applicants speak to it. Next slide. This is the priority project. I'm not going to go through this for the sake of time, to make time for questions. Next slide. Okay, so what are the opportunities here? I would say that if you are a community lender on this call, this is a tremendous opportunity to scale your financing entity, be it a CDFI or other mission-based group. There's 2 opportunities for you. You could go in with an applicant when the funding notice is released, a national entity, and essentially be a co-lead on that applicant to the National Community Investment Fund, where you're expected to do direct project financing with those dollars in your community, or you can actually apply for both. You could apply to a recipient, which will be awarded at a later date under the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, and receive up to $5 million as a community lender as a capitalization grant, and potentially $625,000 for technical assistance to bolster your capacity to manage the award and deploy the dollars for eligible projects. Now, I think that is my last slide. Oh, one more. So I think we saw this a little earlier on the slide, but this is kind of the date by which in the timeline. Some of these are for the rebate programs. If you focus on the bottom in the green, and thanks to Leslie to putting this together for me, we do expect to see those 3 funding notices for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund in June. EPA by statute does have to obligate or award the money by September of 2024 of next year, but that may potentially happen even earlier if they get the funding notices out soon and give folks 60 to 90 days. We'll have to see what they say, but it could be potentially summer of next year when they make awards. Next slide. Great. And I'll pass it back to you, Amanda, for questions.
Great, thank you. I think most of the questions were answered in the chat already. I think there was one in the chat or Q&A already. I think there was one not yet answered, and that was directed to Quinn about the tax credits. If a property is sold, will the tax credit apply to the new buyer, similar to warranty transfer?
Yeah, that one I do not know. I can get back to that person though. I will figure that out.
Great. And I think all of the other questions have been answered. I do want to just point out that back to what Quinn was saying, as far as the Department of Energy rebates that are going through the state. So I put this in the chat, and if you're in Missouri, it's the Division of Energy within the Department of Natural Resources. And if you have specific suggestions like what Leslie was talking about in some of her slides, definitely please reach out to Dana Gray. She's with Tower Grove CDC in St. Louis and part of the Missouri Energy Efficiency for All Coalition. So she put her email in the chat, info@danagray.com, DANAGRA.com. So definitely reach out to her because we want to be influencing how the state rolls out these rebates, and so that they are effective and that they're really for the community that it's meant to serve in the communities that we serve. And then I think Tom Jacobs also asked for rebate programs where guidance is not yet finalized. Will expenses incurred earlier in 2023 be eligible for reimbursement?
Can you guys hear me? Okay,
I can hear
I
you.
would say that what would be eligible is the tax credits. If they qualify for that 45L, for example, that Quinn covered in the residential rebate, there were a couple of other tax credits that you could check out and see if what your expenses, if they fit within those definitions for reimbursement. For the rebates, it really depends on the state, how they design their program, whether it would be retroactive for anything. So we just don't know yet is the answer for those DOE rebates.
Great. Anything to add? Let's see, another question. What is the amount of tax credit is offered, 20 or 30%? Quinn,
Is that which tax credit is that in reference to?
I'm not sure. Denise, yeah, I think it depended on the different tax credits. We are 1 minute over. So if you want to hang on, Denise, we can answer that for you. Otherwise, we will release this recording here soon, send it out to everybody. We'll have it on our website, ours meaning LISC Greater Kansas City, and I'll send everyone else who did register for it a link to the recording and also the slide deck. So I want to thank all of our speakers. Thank you so much. Thanks for everybody who attended. Hopefully this at least shed as much light as can possibly be shed at this point, and I'll be following up with more information once more information is released and once we know more. So any other final words from speakers?
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity, Amanda.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Amanda. It's great.
Thank you, everybody. And Denise, if you do want to hang on, we can just answer your question real quick too. But if everyone else is done, you guys all have a great day. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, LISC. And thanks, Leslie and Mark.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Denise, do you want to say what tax credit you were talking to specifically? And I can try to unmute you if you want to just hang on and okay,
Okay, thank you.
There you go. Hi.
Hi, how's everybody?
Good. How are you?
Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you for asking me about that. So it really didn't depend on whatever tax. I was just asking basically the percentage of any of the tax credits for like the housing part projects. If there was a certain percentage or any like between that and the rebates, was it any kind of percentage they're estimated between 20 to 40% or 10 to 12%?
You're making faces. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to ask if Denise, if you remember which tax credit you're referring to, though.
That's what I don't remember, sweetheart. I really don't.
Well, because some of the credits cover different amounts for different purposes, and like Quinn was saying, that we can send the slide deck out. I think the rebates, some of them will be 100% for lower income households, depending. So it depends on what you're trying to do, right? If it's electrification or if it's, do you have a specific kind of project type in mind that you're trying to support through the rebates or through the credits?
I'm trying to see, I started a nonprofit organization and I'm buying a duplex to turn it into like a resource center. And I wanted to see what the rebates and the tax credit that I would have towards that before I do any, because I've done like the floor, the countertop, I did the bathroom already. So I want to have the other side, the other tenants to move out, so I can just knock the wall out and make it a really one big building instead of two separate, like 820, 36 square feet. And I kind of want to expand it. So I was just kind of wondering what type of tax credit am I going to have? And when I sell it after I leave here, after I, maybe 10 years from now, my warranty and everything will transfer to the new buyer, because it's just a lot of things I'm trying to do in my neighborhood to give the kids, because there's a lot of killing going on in my neighborhood, a lot of negative, and I'm trying to turn it into a positive, a safe place for them to come to. And this is the house. I've been having dreams about this. So it's so funny how this came up to me. I'm like, yay, something I can do, something I can get a rebate for. I was tickled pink about it. So that's what I'm trying to do for only my neighborhood, but for my community, the taxes and the rebate credits. That's what I'm interested in. I don't know if there was a list or something I can go by, but this information is really, really good. And that's what I'm trying to do. So any suggestions or help would be great.
Yeah, I'll just say a lot of the rebates and tax credits that I talked about are related to energy efficiency or electrification or like I didn't recognize when you described sort of your project, which sounds amazing, by the way. I wish you all the success in the world on that project. But I don't know like if it would apply unless you're doing something related to energy efficiency or electrification, or if you have like some sort of renewable like solar panels or anything that's a part of it.
See, I was thinking about adding that, all the energy efficiency. I did the water heater and the furnace is at the energy efficient. So I got a little rebate from Home Depot, like a $75 rebate. That was it. So I'm going, oh, okay, something's better than nothing. And I wanted to add the solar panels, but of course I had to rewire everything. So the electrician said he could do it for like $2,500. I said, that's pretty good, not bad. Let me search around and everything. So when I add the solar panels, that'll be a more energy efficient. So it won't cost me as much or whatever to run it. So when we have our movie nights and have our different events, the pot plant that we're doing, the garden. I got the community garden and the library already up. So once we get some more energy efficient, so I can show this when people come over and say, energy efficient here. So when you buy your own home, you can get this and get this and get that. So I'm trying to lead by an example. It is taking me a while.
I think what might be helpful is the link that Mark just posted in the chat, where it was one of the resources that I mentioned, but Rewiring America is a nonprofit organization that has done a really good job creating tools for people, and they have a calculator tool that is at the link that Mark just posted in the chat. So if you open that up, you can basically input your information and some of the project measures that you're thinking about, and that'll kind of help you decipher maybe what you would qualify for and what some of the measures would provide you some sort of rebate or tax credit. So I'd encourage you to open that up and check that out, and maybe even bookmark it if it is something you want to come back to.
Yes. I love this.
I'm sorry, I have to go take another call, but
sure.
Thanks, Mark.
As a follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate everything.
Thanks, everybody. And quick question as a follow-up to Denise's, is there an occupancy requirement, like commercial versus residential for the rebates? Or
They have to be residential.
Like
it's residential building.
Residential property?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So nothing for nonprofit or commercial?
Not in the rebates, the DOE rebates, but Quinn mentioned some tax credits for commercial buildings.
Yeah, 179D is the tax credit for commercial buildings. So yeah, Denise, still use that calculator, because I think Rewiring America has that 179D. I think they have that component plugged in, and that is for commercial also, like for the for like exactly what you're referring to, sort of the business side of a nonprofit, or like I should say the non-residential part of the nonprofit. So like, yeah, I would use that calculator if I were you, and see if that can help.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for joining, Denise. And
Thank
thank you
you.
again, Leslie and Quinn and Andrea and Mark, who left off. So I'm gonna stop the webinar right now, but you guys have a great rest of your day. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank
Hi, great
you.
job, everybody.
Great job is for right, so true.
Bye.
Awesome.